So today it's Tuesday, and on Tuesdays I work at the office. My regular YouTube setup is back at home and I don't have a camera here, so I thought, how can we solve this? And I thought, well, let's do something different. Let's go for a walk. So in the last week I've had not one, not two, but 3 full-day workshops. 2 of them were workshops on GA4 and one of them was a Google Tag Manager workshop, but mostly also GA4, but no more on the data collection side. So the workshops were great, a great bunch of people, really smart, loved working with them. To be honest, I'm also quite dizzy from all the traveling and all the long days, but good to be with you today. One of the things that I make a point of when teaching GA4, I ask the question, is the data that I'm looking at reliable? Especially when you're starting out with GA4, your expectations of the data will be that the data that you see is exactly accurate. And this can cause a lot of panic when you figure out suddenly that, for instance, the amount of transactions on your site or job applications doesn't exactly match up with what you see in your back office. So it's really important to know that GA4 is probably not 100% accurate. But if you ask me the question, is GA4 reliable? I would answer that with saying yes, it is reliable, but it is not 100% accurate. So why is this? Why is GA4 not 100% accurate? Well, there are a couple of causes, and I would group those causes in 3 groups. So the first group is the law. In many countries in Europe, but also other places around the world, the law around privacy is getting stricter and stricter. So in many places you need consent before you can track users, and this will greatly impact your data. So a very important thing to know is how many people actually give consent on your site versus how many people do not give consent on your site versus how many people just ignore the whole thing altogether. And you will not track users that have ignored your cookie banner. Some sites still have this tiny little cookie banner at the bottom of the page. Well, in my experience, users will just ignore the whole thing altogether and you will not track those users. So it's really important to know how many people accept and to optimize for that. So let's say 55% of your users give consent for analytics storage. Well, only 55% of the visitors will actually end up in your reports. 45% will not end up in your reports. And luckily there's a new technology by Google called consent mode, and that technology can model the missing data based on the data that you have. So the 55% that you have measured, it will model the 45% of data based on that. Of course, part of your report is measured, but a big part of your data is also modeled. That means that it is an estimation of reality and not exactly accurate. And if this is the case on your side, you will find that your data will be off with a considerable margin. I've seen this on a couple of customers' websites, and what you will find is a big warning banner at the top that says that not all data in the report is actually measured, but some of it is modeled. Can you still use it? Of course, but you have to know that it's not 100% accurate. Well, the second root cause why your data is not 100% accurate are the technological limitations that we deal with today. So for example, ad blockers. About a year ago I tried 4 or 5 different ad blockers that were popular at that time, and I found that one of them was actually blocking Google Analytics. So if some of your users are using an ad blocker that is actually blocking Google Analytics, those users and their conversions will not end up in your reports. Also, there are tracking limitations that are built in modern browsers. And I think the most extreme example of this is the Safari browser that is installed on most Apple devices, for instance on this iPhone, but also on MacBooks. If your users are using Safari browsers, their cookie will stay in that browser for at most 2 weeks, and in some cases it will even shorten that time to just 1 day if it sees some tracking parameters in your URL. This means that if somebody comes to your site on Safari today via, let's say, your email newsletter, and in 3 weeks decides to directly come to your site and orders a product, that product order will not be attributed to your newsletter. And this is of course a big problem for a lot of companies. And the last technological limitation that is often overlooked are the in-app browsers. In-app browsers are used by most social media apps. For instance, Facebook If you click a link in Facebook, you will not be redirected to your standard browser. No, you stay in Facebook and it will open up a screen inside Facebook and it will open up the page inside of there. That's called an in-app browser. Well, the analytics cookie that you place on your site will be there in that in-app browser. But if that user tomorrow decides to order a product, they will probably just use their regular browser, and because the cookie was in the in-app browser, not in the regular browser, they will be calculated as a new direct user and they will not be attributed to that Facebook campaign or Facebook post. So especially if you're using a lot of social media campaigns, this is really difficult because Facebook campaigns are usually a little bit at the beginning of the customer journey. So people discover your product and later on they will order it. But the products that those users order are usually very difficult to trace back to your original Facebook campaign. And this makes reporting for social media campaigns very difficult. The last root cause for inaccurate data in your GA4 reports is GA4 itself. Google is actively making Google Analytics more privacy friendly. For instance, no IP addresses are stored anymore in GA4 at this moment. But also, if you have a report full of data and in that report there's, for instance, a newsletter that has had just 2 or 3 clicks, the Google Analytics system will sometimes remove that row from your report because the amount of people in that, for instance, traffic source or landing page is not sufficient. And if the group is not sufficient, they are worried that you will be able to trace that back to a specific individual. So that's why the Google Analytics 4 system will sometimes just remove that row altogether. Also here, in this case, there's a warning at the top of your report that says thresholding applied. And there are ways that you can bypass this. Maybe we'll need to make another video about that in the future. But this can be an important cause for inaccurate data in your reports. Now that you know that your reports are not 100% accurate, what should you do? Well, there are a couple of thoughts. First of all, your session count will be a lot more accurate than your user count. That is because sessions are really easy to track. But if a user performs multiple sessions, for instance, via an in-app browser, via just a mobile browser and via a desktop browser, those separate sessions are really hard to link together. So that's why it's really hard to link your Facebook ads to some revenue that user performs on your website in the future. So a very simple way of reliably tracking the results of your social media campaign is just by looking at sessions more than that you look at users. So for instance, if you have a Facebook campaign, people click on it, can you think of a KPI? Can you think of a conversion that user can perform in that session? They will probably not right away order a product, but maybe they will visit your site for 3 minutes or longer. Or maybe they will sign up for your newsletter. And that actually is a good micro conversion that describes if that user has engaged with your brand successfully. And yes, you're not completely 100% sure that user will make a transaction in the future, but it gives some confidence that user was engaged with your brand, and you just have to have a little faith and a little trust that user will come back in the future. And another way that you could use to find out the success of your different marketing channels is just by asking your users. So on the checkout page you could maybe put a little drop-down menu that says, how did you find us? And then people can select, I just looked up on Google, I saw a social media ad, or I saw a television ad, something like that. And you can use that data as an extra check to see what channels are actually driving the most conversions next to Google Analytics. Well, if you want to take another step, something that you can do is implement server-side tracking. This will bypass some of the technological limitations that we talked about. For instance, ad blockers and a lot of limitations that are caused by modern browsers will be bypassed because you'll be sending the data to your own domain. For instance, my site leonkorteweg.nl. So if I would use server-side tracking, instead of sending the data directly to Google Analytics, I would send the data to a domain of my own, for instance gtm.leonkorteweg.nl. And because it's a first-party domain that's not recognized by ad blockers or by modern browsers, that data will probably come through. So server-side tracking is a good way of bypassing technological limitations. Of course, the limitations that are caused by the law, you cannot bypass that. I do not recommend you bypass it. The law is there for a reason. We should respect that. But what you can do is implement consent mode as soon as possible, so you benefit from machine learning. That will give you modeled data back in your reports where previously there was no data at all. So a feature that I haven't talked about in this video up till now is Google Signals, and that has a good reason. I'm not particularly a fan of Google Signals right now, because enabling Google Signals solves a problem, which is you can recognize users across different platforms, for instance different browsers, if they are logged in with their Google account. But you solve one problem, but then you add another problem. Enabling Google Signals will cause thresholding to be applied in your reports. Also, Google Signals will not work together with server-side tracking, which is also very inconvenient, because server-side tracking is one of the best solutions of improving data quality, but you cannot use that in combination with Google Signals at this time. So I'm not a big fan of enabling Google Signals at this moment. I do think, however, that in the future we will lean more heavily on machine learning to give us a more complete picture of what is really happening on our site. Well, to sum up the video, is Google Analytics 4 100% accurate? Well, no, Google Analytics 4 is not 100% accurate. But can you still rely on Google Analytics to make smarter decisions? Well, absolutely. You just have to know what part of your data is not accurate and how you can work around those inaccuracies. I hope this video has helped you a little bit, gaining a little bit more understanding. I hope this video was clear. I hope it was helpful. Please, if you have any questions, leave them down in the comments below. Also, if you like this video, if you want to support the channel, please click like and subscribe to the channel. My name is Leon Korteweg. This channel exists to help you make better decisions in your daily work. I hope you'll have a great day. See you in the next video. Goodbye.